in the settings file, it somehow didn't like take it. So, and it was saying that I wasn't able to access that.
This is before or after you restored the database?
So this is after I restored. I had basically I like redid everything.
Because the authorities on the table aren't that? Isn't it within the backup that you restored? It's got all the different user authorizations and stuff in this one.
So
no, because you're just taking the database through the
yeah, but I thought the table authorizations were in the table.
Right, but you're not.
So what I did is I downloaded through cPanel. I downloaded the SQL database, and then I created a new user in the shared server, and then just gave it permission, all access permission, or all privileges for that database.
Anyway, it's where you are right now. This is before we even get into Drupal. It's probably a cPanel thing.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is that's managing your Apache config.
Yeah.
Is redirecting.
Well, because like what's interesting is we're not going to be able to access that.
Your production and your development are both on hosted servers?
No, the production is on a dedicated. And then the other thing is that you have some kind of neat here. So some stuff, if it automatically redirects to the production site, you probably use it.
All right.
Excuse me. So it doesn't even seem like index on PHP is broken. Some others could be a cPanel. Not other cPanel calls.
Maybe I'll just get it with the posting.
So I figured I'd let everybody know that this is actually doing a Hangouts on Air attempt. So that way people can actually go to the YouTube page for it and watch what's going on. There says there's one viewer, and I have no idea how to get feedback from them, so I apologize if you're talking. I cannot hear you right now. At least I don't think so.
I think the one viewer thing means YouTube. You have to give them the Hangout link if you want them to.
You have to put the link on the Medium site.
How do you do that?
You can just grab the link from the URL.
Oh,
I don't know if that's the URL you have to share it on.
no.
I've done this before and it worked. It might not because Google isn't consistent with their things. But I've had this work.
Oh, and I can't shrink out of that because I have it all set up to share.
That's what you did the last meetup in Milwaukee, right?
Yeah.
But did you guys do a regular Hangout or Hangout on Air?
We did Hangout on there.
Yeah.
No, only 15 people could join the Hangout part. And then like an unlimited number of people watching YouTube.
All right. Well, just gonna link it from here. So, welcome to Drupal 262. This one's harnessing the power of features. For those who don't know what features are, think of it when you build your Drupal site and you set up a blog, like user profiles or specific site configuration. Those are individual features, and the features module allows you to abstract that configuration and all that clicking you did into code. So that way you can take it from your local site to the development site on a remote server without having to truck around a database and be like, oh, all these changes I did, well, let's do an SQL dump and I import it here. And then also to your production, or be awesome like Panoply and have modules that are features that you give out so that people can have this out-of-the-box functionality. So that's going to be the topic tonight, and I fear we can do a round of introductions, which everybody here kind of understands, so they agree. Matt, for anybody listening in, Drupal developer at Gaggle, working on a software service for schools. Been working to try to improve upon Panelizer and the panel universe for customizations and doing the Drupal 262.
Justin, thinking about very data now, because I wanted to give it to the citizens.
Dave, I'm working enough to get hired. But I just been working on 2 sites, so.
And I'm John. I'm the web developer and social media person for Rogers Hospital. I'm looking at the feed right now. It looks like it's working actually.
Did you post that on the meetup? So
Yeah.
okay. I didn't see it. Maybe it didn't.
I posted it as a comment and then I updated the description.
Oh, okay. Who likes?
Doing good so far.
Yeah.
So I'm Dave Snowback, freelance Drupal developer, also organized Drupal 404, the Milwaukee Drupal meetup, and involved in various open source Drupal projects. Main one being?
David Messersmith, I'm a senior project engineer, design industrial controls. Don't do web design, I'm trying to learn something new.
So this session, I try to keep it was really hard balance because you can either go into like the super mechanics of features or really, really simple, but I wanted to keep it like where it went a little bit more in depth, but was still that anyone that's like, oh, I want to do site building or figure that out can start using it, but not just, I know how to click some buttons and make it export to code, but like try to give it some use cases. So the slides kind of touch on that, and then I figure we can do some live demos of just like creating the actual feature instead of looking at pictures of the UI. Just like quick intro, then hands-on. So I feel the project page sums it up the best. Like the features module enables the capture and management of features in Drupal, features being like what you clicked and created. A feature is a collection of Drupal entities, which I think is that description was a little off, but which taken together satisfy a certain use case, like a blog, a gallery, anything you use to give your site functionality can be exported to code for the most part. So what can be exported? I wrote this because there's 3 different sections. There's the core items. These are things in Drupal that out of the box it supports. Content types, so when you structure content types, you create articles, blogs, whatever. Field bases and field instances. So when you create a field, it's split up. So that way there's the field base, and a field instance is if you use the same field on different content type deals. So that way it saves that individual configuration. Menu links, I've personally never used it, but apparently you can export like menu items. Menus themselves, so that way you have like a specific user menu, you could export the menu and the links to that. Permissions, which is great if you have a lot of configured roles, which you can also export. So that way your user access control system, like how you configure that can be exported. Taxonomy, vocabularies, and then also text formats. So if you configure different formats, you can get that exported. A lot of the basics that take up a lot of time in site building. Then there's also CTools objects. Anything that uses like CTools plugins and that ecosystem that also utilizes the CTools Export API can be exported. And CTools already provides like its own UI for doing that. That's ugly. That's the bulk export module you might see with CTools, and it's a UI for exporting like CTool objects. Don't use that, use features, because features is much cleaner to use and much more user-friendly. But anything that is part of that ecosystem will show up in features and allow you to export it. And later on, we'll touch on like some of those specifics because there's a lot that like CTools objects. What's that? And then contributed implementation. So contrib modules that aren't using like CTool objects, or they're using like their own like API, can create their own export and import hooks. So that way, when you look at features, you can export items that typically wouldn't be there. So anything could get made to be exportable. You just gotta write the implementation.
So our core items, is that what you can do off? Is there any customization, or is that just like if a module doesn't provide it, or
that's
your own custom stuff?
If you installed Drupal with no contributed modules but features and what features requires, you would see the core items. That's what I meant by cores, like Drupal core. So that's out of the box what it exposes. I might have missed one or two, I'm not sure, because when I did this, I realized I didn't do it on a vanilla Drupal install. I kind of like cherry picked what ones I knew were from contributed modules. So touching on CTool objects, contrib what? Like I said, CTools has like its own plugin objects that if they use the Export API or their own API in the case of views, it hooks into that. It lets you harness that into features. So number one being views. Your views allows you to export code, but it gives you a text box full of code that you have to copy paste. And that's a nightmare. Features lets you manage it through features. So you can go to the UI, say, I want to export this, and it does it for you. Page Manager pages. If you're using Page Manager, you can, and you create a custom page, you're using panels, that awesome customization for that one landing page can actually be static. There's a site where that's how most of the site content is. It's an e-commerce store. Only the products are outside of features, but all the landing pages are actually controlled in there. And that's how we work on it and develop or locally, then push it up, develop, verify it. It gets pushed up to production, and all the landing pages and flashy content is held in code. And then examples of contributed modules, which I feel there's more out there, but when I checked the contrib API for hook implementations, it came up with the WYSIWYG module. So if you set up WYSIWYG, like your TinyMC or CKEditor configuration, all those millions of checkboxes you check, you can export that configuration so you never have to do it again if you don't want to. Another one is commerce features. This is where the core module of the commerce universe don't support features. This contributed module lets you export product configuration, like product bundles and customer profile setups. So that's one way that that contributed modules can hook into features to ease your configuration life. And then there's this neat infographic from Development Seed that kind of just shows, like, on the left, there is your Drupal site where you have, I got these contrib modules over here that I may do this. But using features, it kind of organizes that for yourself. You're like, this is my end result. I now have it packaged and I have this and this. That's why I view Panoply is you are building a website where you use the different components of Panoply that are all features to give a certain tool set. So a brief overview of how it works. So, you configure the site and create a set of features. And then through the feature modules, you can cherry pick components. Components would be your text format and your roles or your permissions, those individual items. And then it will create a module of these components exported to code. And then you can take that code and enable the module and, well, boom, you have that. So if you took that to a vanilla site that didn't have any of that configuration and turn it on, you'd have it right there, which is great if you do client work. If you have certain things that clients always want, like sliders or blogs, create your own feature module, drag it around with you, charge them like 3 hours when it took you the half hour to turn on the module and make a few tweaks, get some revenue. So quick, let's run through how to make a feature. So in this example, everybody's done the standard Drupal install, right? Where you get article and basic page. That's all done in code. So we're going to just run through how you could set up your own out-of-the-box profile to give you the article content type and its fields based on what Drupal already gave you. So you didn't have to do any configuration. Somebody did it, export it, ready to rock and roll. So to create a feature, you go under structure, and then there will be the features link. When you click on features, it'll give you an overview of all the existing features that are in the system, which we'll cover a little bit later. But in the upper right, there's a tab for creating a feature. So you can configure the module. There's a few options on the left-hand side, which we'll dive into when we do the demo, but the ones to highlight are you give it a name. That's the name of your module. Description, if you want to get descriptive with it. If you're going to release it to the wild, I would recommend doing that. If it's internal, you probably know what it is. And then there's an advanced section, and in there, there's a path to generate the feature module. This allows you to generate it straight to your code base where you are. Otherwise, you would download a compressed version of the code. So pretty simple, just configuring that. And then you get to the right side of the form, which is where you pick what you need. So Features has this awesome, this great ability that it'll auto detect things that relate to each other. So in this example, I clicked on content types and I checked the article content type because I know that's what I was going after. And it picked out my dependencies. It grabbed the field bases I would need that are being used by that content type, and same with the field instances. And one of those is the node article field tags, which is a taxonomy reference. It said, oh, I need to export this taxonomy vocabulary so that the field works. So it makes life a little bit easier too in that way. You know what you're specifically going for, and it will say, I think you need this.
So what would happen if you had, say, other content type super articles and it had the same field?
So that's when a conflict rises up, and I think that'd be good to touch on when we do the live demo.
So you mean like if you had two separate features, one that had article and one that had super article, or if you were writing both in the same?
If you have two separate features that you want to make, then it's not sure.
That's one that, like, ideally, you'd want to put that field somewhere else so that way they don't conflict, but it'll say there's a conflict, and I actually don't know what happens when they're both enabled. Does it prevent you?
I think like the second one will override the first one.
Yeah.
What you would do is you would make like a third module that had the field bases, then you make both of those modules depend on that one.
Yeah.
And they have their own field instances.
So it does take some, like this is taking the body field, so anything else that uses the body field would require this module then. So it's just, there is some planning to go about it, but hey, that's the fun part, right? You make some mistakes and you go, oh man, I enabled one feature and it turned on 10. So in this instance, we would click create or download and get our code. Like I said, generate just drops it by default in the site's all modules. You can type out a custom path if you want. Download gives you the compressed, enable, and you can distribute. So over here, it generated articles.features.fieldbase. That's the code that provides the hook to say, look at my field bases, import them, and so on and so forth. The one to just kind of highlight is .features.inc. That holds any existing like hooks or general hooks that don't necessarily have like content types. There's actually a regular hook for that, and from my experience, things that already have an existing hook for importing will go into there unless that export API says that you should put it in a separate file. Just if you wonder what all these files are and what are they doing, to kind of make it a little bit more manageable. So that was a quick blow through on how to create a feature. Does anybody want to ask any quick questions on that or wait for the demo, just in case? All right, so I'm just going to blow through like managing features, and it's more so just what happens when you actually have a whole bunch of features on your website. So here's an example of going to the features page when you have features in it. I did this testing with the Panoply site, which is great because it's a whole bunch of features. So you'll have like the module name, it'll show the description, and it has the state column that says default or overridden, which I'll get to in the next page. And then actions, which is recreate. The recreate link takes you back to what we just went through, so you can update your feature. So states and features. This is kind of what makes it awesome, because otherwise you would just dump stuff into code and let it blindly import. So it's the status. If the configuration in the code matches what's in your database, it comes up as default. That means that your site is matching what was exported into code, and features has this magic where it like loads the code and takes the database and makes a hash and is like, does the hash match? Some kind of magic like that. In that instance, if let's say the database is a head, this is the part where it gets fuzzy. for me on how it exactly works, but if the database doesn't match, if somebody edited something on the live site and it doesn't match the code, it'll show up as overridden. That's basically telling you that, hey, this new update to your code isn't going to get imported because your database doesn't match. So it doesn't just blindly like make changes. You have this like kind of check in place. So yeah, overridden features won't automatically update. Otherwise, if it was at default and you pushed in like a new field and a field instance to your article, it will automatically show up if the default state is at, or if the feature state is at default. Otherwise, you run into this overridden issue, which becomes a little bit of a nightmare for yourself. But luckily, you see that made like overridden. It doesn't really tell you much. Luckily, when you actually click on the module name or the state, it'll take you to view that feature, and you can see what components are overridden. So again, this is when the database is conflicting with what's in the code. In this instance, I changed the featured image field display formatter, its size or something like that. And that would, like, let's say your client went through and changed something on you, and then you like did some updates and it didn't go, and you're like, what's going on? You can say, oh, well, they must have customized this or something like that. Your code is not going to blow away their changes because you don't know if it was beneficial or detrimental. So that's a cool. Any questions on like managing a feature and seeing like those overrides, I guess? Because it was like short because a lot of it, it's hard to put into pictures until you do like a demo.
Features are for moving like from your test site to an existing site. And you should really try it from your test site where you're doing it to either the group or another test site on your computer or something to make sure things are working.
Yeah.
And then grab a copy of production, try and move it to that to it. That would be almost your final test, or like a QA site that would be.
How I test it is, I mean, our product is built on Panoply and also built on features. I do my configuration and like I'll do a quick look at the code, but I think I got it. If not, well, I reinstall the database and I turn everything on. And if it's missing, then I shot myself in the foot and I have to redo it. That's all.
That's all on the test site before you go to production, you're saying?
Yeah, you know, just make sure that it's all there, because you don't want, like, great example, if you're using version control. This is one reason I highlighted the files and brought up the files. You updated your feature because you added a view. Well, it's going to create your module.views default.inc. Well, if you didn't add that file to your version control and that's how you pop stuff around, all of a sudden you're going to go turn on that module and you're going to be like, where's my view? Well, it got left behind because it wasn't put in version control, or maybe you forgot to upload it because it's a new file. So that's when it is good to kind of do a test, move it around, you know, take it to another test site. Or
part of it depends on how many developers. I mean, if you have like a group development, QA section, and production, you're going to be kind of staging it several times. But
yeah, and then there's a whole other can of worms that get into that. And if we get towards the end, we can touch on like the issues on using features and multiple developers. Because like I said, features like it's this huge thing that gets into like the advanced, like super advanced to like just using it. And I'd like to cover that part once we make it through all that, just like some of the caveats of sharing features amongst developers. Because you can override each other's code easily. So did a quick section to just kind of go through some of the things that make features even more awesome and more useful. Kind of like that you should just have this in your toolkit if you're using features. Strong arm is my favorite contrib module. Strong arm, think of it as like you're going to strong arm a variable in place, which I think just the name makes me enjoy it that much more, because like you're sticking and you're stuck. So it's really, really nice because it's your variables. It's those little settings that aren't technically part of a field. Take, for example, you could set your site default, the site mail, the site name, export that to code your configuration. For content types, if you have strong arm enabled, it allows you to save the settings. Like, I don't want it to say published or when it was published. That little checkbox, that's part of the node settings. So now you have that whole thing brought with you. StrongArm is also built on the CTools API, which is how it's easily exported. So you don't need features to use StrongArm. If you want to get, buck wild and actually just write your own hooks, you can use StrongArm without features. The Diff module. So when a feature is overridden and you have the Diff module enabled, it gives you a cleaner way to see the overrides. So that example, I didn't edit the image. I changed what the feature, if it's a featured news item or not, how that displays. So you can see the exact code change of what if the database would be exported to code and what the code actually says. You can see where that changed to maybe identify a regression. It gives you a better idea. So just saying it's overridden. I don't know. Here's a wild yes. So that's really useful and can solve a lot of headaches, especially if you think everything's great. Maybe you found a bug in features or something else. I found out that if you alter a view programmatically and you don't check the view name properly, it can cause every view's export to show up overridden. So, yeah. Then there's this whole other spectrum of UUID and then using UUID features. So the UUID module provides entities with a universal unique ID, which kind of means that you can move them around and not have conflicting data. The idea is to get away from having conflicting primary keys in your entities. And doing this with UUID features, it extends features to support UUID, allows you to export entities. So now you can export more than just configuration. You can actually get some of those pieces of content. Don't really recommend using it to migrate your content. There's little neat parts that work. For example, it's not in a screenshot, but worked with my Crittenden to get Fieldable Panel Panes exportable to code. Fieldable Panel Panes lets you do more unique panel pane things. Like if you use Panoply, the link, the photo slider, all of those are Fieldable Panel Panes. We have it, one of our templates actually, that Justin just cooked up, has by default the photo slider, and we use UUID features to export the two default images and their text in that Fieldable Panel Pane in its place. So when a customer gets it, they see this site with default content and a slider. So there's use cases. Don't go nuts with it. You could export nodes and such, but that's a little crazy. You can export files. So it's nice to have in your tool set, but I just recommend not to go too crazy on it. And so then I'm going to put this link on the meetup page because I think I forgot to before we got here. It has some of the links to the feed to the actual project pages. Things got a little bit crazy, so I wasn't able to drop in some of the articles. There's a lot of articles on this, so I know this is going to kind of go over the top of it. But if you really want to dive into it and learn some more practices, just do a Google search and you'll find article upon article about using it, management strategies, and just general ideas. Okay. So let's updating. What I'd like to do is, what's somebody's example of when you're building a site, what's something that you think would be super awesome to be able to take this concept and put it into code? If anybody has major one.
Improv demo.
Huh?
This is improv.
Well, I didn't want to go for something generic. I wanted to at least try to hit on something that could be super unique that wouldn't exist, because I always fall back to a slider. People are oh, sliders are awesome, rotating images, even though 80% of people see the first one and then don't go to the second one. So once my local server decides to cooperate, we'll kind of go through how you can create that using I always use Flex Slider, and how you can export your Flex Slider to either use a content type or Fieldable Panel Panes. Hopefully I did not do that on here already.
Panes as in P-A-N-S.
Kind of PAI.
As I said, P-A-N-S.
All right, so just to touch on this, whenever I've had to build a slider in Drupal, I always use Flex Slider because it's just a really simple and responsive slider library that, well, when I say simple, you can drop it in and it just works, but then you can do awesome, like, expansive things with it. So it's adjustable. So
I hit on a page the other day where the slider kept on changing, and it was changing size from the different pictures and stuff that was displayed. And so my page kept on jumping up and down.
yeah,
Just in Flex Slider?
No, I'm just saying on the website, I was wondering if Flex Slider can
it will, no.
clear that or-
If your thoughts, when you're doing a slider, it would be best to give some kind of default constraints, because no matter what you get, an image is always going to take over that height unless you set the actual image tag to be that, but then you're going to get an ugly. So like Drupal's great because you can define image styles, which are exportable in features. So that way you can build a slider that has a specific image style, export it all, and then you just like turn it on, you're like, bam, your client.
If you're sadistic enough to actually want to see different IDs on your page to move, Flex Slider actually will use CSS3 transitions when they're available. JavaScript, and you can actually set it to smooth what you've done. So it'll actually provide like a transition. So you're not like super early and then
Let's not leave place there. Oh, and I get kicks out of Flex Slider too because it has views integration and then fields. So you can have your field display be a Flex Slider or just create a view for yourself. Sorry, I did this on the. I'm used to doing things on two different computers anymore. And the archives of the internet for eternity. Panoply is P. Okay, sorry for the setup delay. So let's make a slider real quick. One of the simplest ways you could do it is create your own custom content type that is called slider. So we'll go ahead and do that quick. Like home banner slider, something pretty that your customer would get, like, oh, I want you to make my front page all like advertisement-y. And that's one thing they get. So we're gonna, turn off promoted front page because that, whatever, that actually doesn't matter, but we'll turn off display author. I'll just save and add fields. So the next step would be to add an image field, because that's what the banner's for. So do slider image, pick that image, just keep it simple there. Click save. Now, if you could imagine, if you're like pounding out client work, and let's say you do this like 4 times a month, and you're wasting this time 4 times a month, I guess it'd be a little bit annoying when you know, like, I'm doing the same thing to myself each time I go. I'll do unlimited. And then, so now we have our content type with our image field, and we can actually get started right now. So we'll go back to structure, and we're going to create ourselves a view. Which is the one thing to do if you do decide to use Flex Slider or any kind of module that provides views integration. If it has a sub-module that enables that integration, don't forget to turn it on before you get all the way to creating your view, like I do every single time. Which can be one more reason to use features, because then you don't have to think about it. It's put into dependencies, and it'll turn itself on. All right, so let's add the new view. Call this slider, and we'll create a block. And display format, so I turned on Flex Slider views, so that way now our display format can actually just be Flex Slider. And we're going to say we limit it to 5. So then we're in here, and we need to add our, so for the format settings, you know, option set, caption field, you can do title if you want. And then it's not going to really do much until we add our image. So we can turn off the label, image style. So this is where you'd want to like set up some kind of image style, so that way it's uniform throughout. And click save. So now we already have our block made that's pulling in the slider content type, or not. So let's go grab some content and put it in there quick. We'll make it a slider of this actual presentation. Three's good enough. So let's go add that block in somewhere just to demonstrate that it's working and it's something that we're going to want to reuse over and over again. So we can click customize this page. We'll just add it through panels, hopefully. Yes. No. We're going to go old school and we're going to place it through the block UI. Apparently this is an old version of Panoply. It doesn't have the Block module enabled. Yeah, I don't know what that inline difference.
From Diff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like if you're viewing a revision?
Oh.
Oh.
That goes from Diff.
Research everybody if you wanted.
You can also make your view have a content pane rather than a block.
Yep. That's actually what I should have done. Is added that too. Instead of waiting for this slow machine. Although I'm glad I finally figured out why it's slow. It's because it has a regular hard drive, but I found out it's a 500 RPM instead of, you know, like 10,000 or even 7,000. So it's like a dinosaur. Oh, views content. No, I did have it. I'm gonna do that quick. So that way it shows up. So this is actually a great example too, like track backing to it and turning on the views pane. So let's say that you do some sites utilizing panels, some you go without panels and just use blocks, and you want to use this in both use cases, but you don't like to place blocks in your panels. You can turn on the views content module and create a content pane that mimics the exact same thing for yourself. So that way it's, what's the exact difference between embedding a views content pane in a panel pane versus
There's
a block?
a huge difference. So blocks are super simplistic. They just have a title and content. Whereas content panes can be placed times. They can have all the settings you can give them,
Okay.
have context, relationships, all that stuff.
So there we go. It gives you more, oh yeah, because you can go into here and you can change.
Yeah, it can say
Like-
I want to allow users to change the title, change the page.
Of course, now in DA, place blocks.
Yes. So that there will not be in DA's panels with these blocks.
Oh, sweet. Instead of like the whole pane thing. Oh, that's cool. So we're going to customize this page and place our demo slider. Add, save, save it again.
It'd be interesting to see how much of the thinking changes to DA as opposed to people just shoving things over and re-entering, adjusting to memories.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that. That's a
And core, they pretty much rethought through everything, and there's a lot of stuff happening.
There's a lot of stuff that hasn't changed. Like everything associated with form API is pretty much the same.
Except form states a class to
Well,
object. I'm excited. I hate, if there's one thing I hate about Drupal, it's its forms. I love the form API, but I want to like take a hammer to it at the same time. Like form state caches, like will make me hate life so much.
Still, that's a super minor change. I mean, the
I know it's it's minor because it didn't change anything, but at least it's like a class, so it's
Yeah.
easier to work with.
I mean, the majority of the form API has all of the elements, right?
Yeah.
And all of that's pretty much the same. I mean, there's a couple of views for caching and stuff, but it's largely changed.
So we have the slider, it's in place, and we're like, yeah, I'm gonna use this all the time. So let's create our first feature. Now that I ate up that much time just configuring it, proving the point why features is awesome. So we'll click on features.
So you're saying this should have been the last month's presentation or your standard modules that you use?
Yeah, actually it should have, but it's one of those that like it needs like its own love. Because it's not one that you could hit the ground running with it, but at the same time, it needs a little bit of more like
I'm saying, you
introduction.
have your standard modules that you like to use almost 90% of the time.
Because
You'd also probably have some features that you'd like to put on that list of, I'd like to copy this and all the time.
I've gone off the board. I went from like loving features to I don't want to use features. I want to write everything in code in my own hooks. That's why it's proposal. To me, like I just wish that like if I could use features without the features UI and those hooks just existed, that's how it would probably work. That's why it wasn't in my. my list, just because I've had some bad run-ins with things. Like, so to touch on one thing is developers can overwrite other developers' code if features are overridden. And then you lose features, and there's no easy way, even in version control, just like explode these hunks. Like, there can be data loss, which kind of stinks. So that's one of the caveats when you have multiple developers working on a feature. So we're at the configuration form. Again, left, right side here, we're going to dump in some information about our module, which we're going to call home banner slider. Drops an awesome sauce flex slider for clients. It's part of the package awesome sauce, because that's the name of our imaginary company right now. So the first thing that I would do is like, okay, well, the main force of this feature is the content type. So I would just check that. And then features, and be like, yo, you want this? Well, here's some things that are kind of attached to it that we're going to need to bring along anyways, so that way it's fully functional, such as the field base, because the field base isn't there, the field instance isn't going to do any good, and nobody can put a picture. And then it takes any field instances, which are like the configuration for those fields per your content type. And then StrongArm, field bundle settings, I actually have no idea what that does or what's in it. I just know it's always there. If anybody has something about what it does, David, do you know?
So I don't know what all is in there. I think like the weights of things that aren't fields.
Oh, like
Or fields that aren't fields.
like
There's
the
probably some other junk.
pseudo. Okay, it's like the menu options, node options. Like I said, where you can say like hide the submitted, and if it's going to be promoted by default. That's where StrongArm is really nice, because if you don't have StrongArm, that's going to always go back to the default settings. So by adding StrongArm, and you're like, services content type can only be in the services section or like services menu, you can now force that into the feature instead of it getting to another site. Right? It keeps ending up in the main menu because the client doesn't know to change where it belongs.
Is there anything besides like diff that you can use to see where there may be conflicts? Or do you want another what somebody else has done?
Just maybe you're the answer to this, David. I feel like that without using diff, you can view features overrides, but I don't know how without it. I feel like it's a hit or miss. Like the features override tab that lets you see what's overridden, like the add and deletion, is that part of features? Or is that from features override?
That's part of features. That's part of
I feel like half the time.
with multiple developers, it's just about like put everything into Git, and then you're going to be resolving conflicts as you would any code in Git, right?
Yeah.
Which, since you're probably, well, at least you're not used to reading the things that features dumps, that can be like really difficult. It's like, what is all of this junk that's changing? But after you've done it a while, how do you start to learn what all of those pieces are? Some things are remarkably unuser friendly, like views. You get a load of strange keys that we don't know what they are. But yeah, I guess Git is your tool to help you manage that.
Yeah, because when it's in Git and you commit often, you can't. It's near impossible to screw anything up because you can always go back to a certain point, unless you accidentally do it to yourself before you made the commit. Then it's kind of like a oops. But if you push something up to code and then the other developer's working on it as well and re-export it, but didn't have your changes yet, you can at least resolve that conflict. But otherwise, it's at our work. When we were having issues, we were just like, someone's the features master. Like, if you want to update a feature, you have to clear it by them. And we kind of were like, nobody touch this. If you have it, like, run an export, communicate with them. Like, that's how we did it. It was kind of like, hey, I need to update this. Okay, well, that person reached out to everybody, like, don't touch it. Do you have it overridden? Are you doing customizations? It's communication. So the one thing we're missing is our super awesome view that actually lets us put that in there. So views, we can export any views. And one thing to touch on, and this is one thing that always kind of confused me about features, but I guess works if you customize them, if a module provides like the exported code for a view or like a CTools object, pretty much. I'm using, when I say CTools object, I'm getting the right terminology down technically, right? Would
I
you
would
say
say exportable,
exportable?
but that's just.
We'll say CTools exportable. Is that?
What's a little bit of documentation?
So this has admin views enabled, which exports its default views into code without features. Well, you can technically snag them up into features, which you don't really need to because it's in that module's code. But if you make customizations, this is one way that you could kind of port around your customizations of a module's default views. So like, especially if you're using commerce, I haven't tested it this way because I use default alter, but let's say you need to modify the shopping cart. I would create a feature called commerce overrides that holds all of my views that I've customized. So that way, if I wanted to, I could revert commerce back to its original and compare, oh, there's an update to like, let's say use commerce kickstart because commerce kickstart is what everybody uses and customizes. And then you can never update it once again because you'll lose everything. Using features, you can export the views into its own code to like override that. At least in theory, Commerce Kickstart still uses features 1.x, so kind of toss that out the window. But the concept's there at least. I forgot Kickstart uses 1.x, so that this is using features 2.x, which provides the nicer UI. It splits fields from being one export into field base and field instance. So if you do run anything that uses features 1.x, it's going to be less of a user interface, and you can't just jump between the two APIs. So we're going to generate this now that we have our content type fields in the view. And then I didn't change the export path, so it went straight to sites, all modules, home banner slider. If you're writing your own like client profile, in that path, you could have been profiles / my awesome profile / modules, and then the module name, or yeah, just to there, and then it would create it in blah, 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 home banner slider. And so we'll go to the manage portion. So these are all modules, but they still show up in managed features, and you can actually enable or disable feature modules through this interface. So we're going to turn this on. Click Save Settings. Wait.
This machine usually help.
This is what I usually developed on, but then I got my iMac and it has a flash storage, so it's like everything is fast. This is the Mac I set it to be just Vagrant and VMs. So when I don't feel like dealing with that, because for some reason the NFS will break. I don't know why. So I just do it on here. But the only reason I don't do it on here often is just a slow hard drive. It's just that's on the plan. I just got new windows on my house, so kind of strapping the budget right now. So our feature was enabled. Technically doesn't show us much because we already had this in the database, right? So if I did a reinstall and turned that on, we would get our configuration back. But I just want to show that if we continue to make changes, and like let's say we're enhancing our feature, that this is going to show up as overridden and how we can see like what the overrides were. Do we want to recreate so that we get all of them? So let's go back to structure. And I don't know if I went through creating the slides very fast, but it still had the body text. Now you could make a slider where they can type in an awesome little snippet and it's like the title, the snippet, and the back and the image is like behind it and all that wizardry. or get rid of the body text, so that way they just have a semantic title for administrative purposes, and then the picture. So we'll go to our content type, and we're going to manage the fields, and we'll just delete the body field. So that way, when your customer is going to go add content or go add a slide, and they click this home banner slider, they just get the title and then the image field. So it's a lot simpler for them, you know, quick in, bada boom. Now if we go back to our feature, it's going to show up as overridden. And as you saw where it says checking, that's when it's kind of doing like that hash check. And if you have a lot of features, this page can take a little bit to load. It can take like 20 seconds to go through everything. So be mindful of that. If you're on your production server, just don't go to this page. Just don't, like, avoid it. I mean, it's not like it's going to bring the house down, but it's still just, it's going to put a spike on your server. So just forewarning, especially if you get really, really big features that have a lot of code in them. So let's check out what's overridden. This is great that you pushed your code up. You worked on this all hard on your local device. You're like, oh, I'm going to put it up on the client server. You know, we made an update to it, and it's like, it's overridden. Well, that means that my changes didn't show, you know, what's going on here. And then you're like, oh, my field instances are overridden. I mean, the case isn't going to follow exactly, but it's still a good debugging tool on like managing your features. So just to go over this overview again, like when you're viewing your feature, it shows the different components, which are your different hooks and your exportables that are there. You know, if they're default, that means that everything's good. If it's overridden, that means something changed in the database compared to your code. And then you can also just see the individual items. Again, this is one that you look at it and you can kind of get what it means, but as you use features more and more, you start to get the nature of it all. Like, oh, field, well, it's a field underscore image. That makes sense. It's like a full machine name. Then field instances, it's like node, okay, that's the entity. Home banner slider, that's the bundle, the content type, and then the field name. You start to pick it up. Same with strong arms, pretty semantic machine names. But this is our issues. The field instances is overridden compared to when we created the module. So if I click overridden. So going to review overrides, I have the diff module enabled, so that's a little bit more clear as to what's going on. And we'll realize, like, oh, all this is missing right here. And then you look at this array, it says the body field was deleted. In this case, we wanted this to happen, but if you went, let's say you uploaded this, you're like, well, why isn't this working? It's like the client deleted the body field. Well, why did they do that? I should revert this, or maybe you're like something more could have happened. But in this case, we want to update the module because we don't want the body field to be there. So when you come back, it might show up extra dependencies that aren't checked because those are dependencies of your dependencies. Click them if you want so that they're not blue and taunting you, but you're just fine without. So then we're going to generate the feature again to update our field instance code. One issue, and I'm pretty sure this happens, and hopefully, David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. In this case, let's say you had the customer, you already deployed this on customer sites, and then you're like, never mind, we don't want a body field, yank it out. Even though you removed it from your features code, that field and field instance are still going to live in the database. Yes.
That's it. Just fields are weird.
Yeah, because fields weren't meant to be, you know, like well, you can create fields in code, but they weren't meant to be like, hey, we're going to export the configuration of code so they're like hot swappable. Yeah. So you could then write your own like update hook to delete the field. Which, another gotcha. If you're going to do that, test it a few times, because feature rebuilds and modules enable, well, if it's enabled, the hook will run fine, but if like you enabled it and a hook ran, sometimes Drupal hooks run before the feature's rebuilt and you get some quirky issues. Just as a forewarning, and again, diving into the advanced deep side of the pool. So yeah, that's kind of creating a feature. Is there any like major questions, or like, what about this or that? Should I do an example, like using UUID features to like export like fieldable panel panes in like this kind of example? So if you had like a demo content, like you wanted to throw up a demo site without using customer content, and you needed like that slider to be in that spot. Should I go for it? Sure. So go into here. So here's the catch to this next portion. You need the latest development version of Fieldable Panel Panes and UUID features. Which, David, have you used the latest dev of Fieldable Panel Panes yet?
I've tested. There were some bugs that
you can add bundles to the UI.
Yeah, that is going to be awesome for.
So I plan on kind of sprint on that soon. Hopefully. The panel panes, right?
Panel panes.
Entity is panel panes, right?
Pretty sure it's still panel panes.
It's still panel panes.
Maybe that typo.
So I'm doing what you shouldn't do. I'm just going to override what Panoply had for the sake of this. And then version of this.
So all the patches been created, then they're all awesome.
Props to Das Peter. It's my guy right now. Makes me a very happy person. So this is a good example of if you have a site that you're managing quite a bit of things locally, like the landing page content is super static. Like you don't need it to be edited on the production site. It's kind of like, this is a brochure site. It's just like this, you know, that's one approach you could take for it if you wanted to. So this is a way that you could update the photos and like that slider and actually just have them in code, and then you're revisioning your content. Is that a great thing to do? I don't know, but UUID features would have solved our issues before, because we had to like place the panes, then bring it up somewhere and place the image, and then bring it down and like update the code so that way the file ID was right, and some headaches there.
Is UUID what Drupal 8 implemented and then they backported it to 7? Is that what it did?
So in Drupal 8, all entities have a UUID. I'm pretty sure that the UUID module and all that stuff existed before development.pa started. So
Yeah.
It's not a backport.
I think
Recently under discussion, I was kind of they said, or maybe they said if you're able to then Drupal stuff,
You could do some similar things.
then when you go to 8, it's a much simpler like,
Yeah, I don't know if that'll. I mean, I guess like the UUID guys integrate with migrate or something. We shall see.
so. For this quick, I'm going to add a new Fieldable Panel Pane type bundle, and to talk about possible conflicts with fields, I'm going to use the same field, because that's probably what you want to do. It's like, oh, I got this in here, and then you're going to grab it and go through default again. So this is one where now, before we use like a content type, and this is going to be a fieldable panel pane, which means all the images are going to be in the field. which means we want to get the field display formatter to use flex slider. So I have to enable that. So flex slider. Save this quick. So now what I can do is we'll go to content demo. And I'm going to customize this page. Add a fielded pane or slider. So quick, just again. Sure. Load one file, two file. Yes. The only thing I noticed is like one or two times when I was like testing this, it like wiped. I was like about to click upload and it refreshed and it like wiped out the upload field data. Like before I got to click, but I think it was just me being in. I don't know. Yeah.
Lots of edge cases and stuff. If you could reproduce it,
that'd be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I'm sure somebody then would be like, Matt, guess what happened? So again, we basically recreated the same thing, and now we have it as a fieldable panel pane.
Doesn't mean it would be reproducible. It would be not deterministic.
Yeah. So the thing we can do now. What? Let's save this page. There we go. So one thing that I noticed with the fieldable panel panes is to click make this reusable. Actually, I'm not even sure if that might just be out of force of habit from when using the fieldable panel pane and UUID features. But I just checked that anyways for just in case, because there's just a lot of things that happened before it got finalized. We ran into a lot of issues. But now what we can do is we can create a new feature that, you know, you want to call it like demo page or something that has that in it. So let's create a new feature.
You want to put the fieldable panel pane. It's fine. Other features.
I was just feeling like if there's two separate ones.
Okay, so mixing the config and content.
Yeah, so this one like could be you have a slider you're gonna like port around, but this is like you have a landing page that you're like, I'm just gonna stick this in code, and then the client's landing pages are always. That's what happened with this site. Is it's all the landing pages are page manager pages exported to code, but the products are still entities that float in the database, but all those are just page manager pages in code that reference file IDs, which would have been cool to know about UUID features. It didn't have file entity integration then, but to export the actual file into the features, and then it's completely.
And then my inclination just to then put the type in one feature, content in another.
That would be
And
for demonstrate. That would be the proper way to do it. Is to have configuration and content separate. That would be the better way to do it. So with UUID features, we can export the pane type, which we want slider, because that's the content type of the entity bundle. And then under here it says Fieldable Panels pane, and this is actually our custom bit of content that was created on that page. Check that. And I'm going to test something before it automatically grabbed the files for me. But I think since they enhanced this, it may not work the exact same way, but we're going to do a quick test. Well, I could go through and I could click generate feature. And then now that Fieldable Panel pane I created is going to be into code and have its own UUID feature. And if we exported that panels page, which I should have grabbed, although I can't because it's part of demo, the page will reference that UUID, and that's how it knows to place that. It says, I need to place this Fieldable Panel pane by this UUID. It says, oh, well, it's been imported to code, and that's how it makes like the link. Yeah, because that's provided by Panoply Demo, and it's a panelizer entity displays. So with UUID features, you can export the custom panelizer. That is neat. So now it's completely like we customized the one version of that node, and now we're able to export that customization, and not just the default, and also our Fieldable Panel pane. The use case for this, I can't even think of what one would be, but it's great for this example right now. So. I'm curious to just see real quick if it grabbed the files off the bat. Here's the type. Oh, it doesn't now. So basically what it does is it creates this code, and then like for UUID features, it has its own implementation in order to create entities out of this code. It seems that now with the updates to UUID features, we have to update our patch so it works as well as everything else. But it's one of these pictures. I'm just going to grab them all for. So it exported it into base 64. So this way when it imports, it will actually give you your files at the same path and read the base 64 code to create the exact file, which anything that has a file entity reference or a file reference should automatically.
What are the UIDs at?
See,
Yeah, it looks like there's nothing in that field time.
no, why?
Close.
Well, the expected result was in there. It was going to say, hey, I think UUID features changed how it operates. Before it would actually export the file entity into the entity and do like a, hey, well, this has a file, attached, we'll import that, then this. And they probably made it more structured so that's separated, but
There's some bug happening, so you should have data in that field.
Yeah.
The curse of doing a demo.
cursive doing a demo and messing with UUID features. It's one of those that in a lot of instances, it can be really useful, but also make it extremely more complicated. Like as an example, if you do decide to use UUID features, for some reason, UUID items run before everything else. UUID components will run before your fields are created, which means that your stuff is imported, but they can't import the field data because they don't exist yet. So you have to revert after everything has been built. That's another little, if you do use it, you've got a little extra step in there that Drupal wants, that everything wants to throw at you. I guess that's all I pretty much have for it. Is there anything that, like workflow questions, or David, if you can think of anything I really like skipped over that'd be useful? I'm kind of, that's all I can think of for like a general like how to use. Yeah. I went over a lot of stuff that what did I go over like too fast or could be useful to like revisit quickly? You're new to Features Universe too, so whatever you've got going on.
I'm sure something will come up.
Yeah.
As of recently. It's pretty straightforward.
It's useful, but don't just remember that it's not the catch-all solution to, well, it's like the best solution out there. I didn't highlight default config because I don't really understand it. Would you want to touch on it, David? I can pull up the project page.
I mean, it just, is when you have a feature and you change something in this feature, it's marked over it. Default config can take a lot of the same things that features can take, but rather than when you change it, it becomes overridden. It just sets it once, and then the user can change it
Okay.
as much as they want.
Because I think you explained that to me before, but I always forget and look at it like, I don't know. So it'd be great, like
Permissions is a great use case. So you use default config to hold your permissions. That way, afterwards, like you set some faults, and then the user can change them, but it won't mark the feature as overridden. So if they revert for whatever reason they want, take the changes in writing.
okay. Oh, so that way, like, if you, like, that's why Panoply uses default config, so that way you can change anything that would be changed by the person, allows them to still get the benefits of future updates without those overrides hindering them.
Yeah, but so we don't want there's a lot of valid reasons to revert. Like if there's an update or something, sometimes Monopoly will force the user to revert, like we'll add in an update hook that something has to be reverted. And we don't want them to lose valid changes that they have made, and permissions is one of those kind of things. So set it once and then
No, cool.
what happened today.
So that's one thing that if you are providing, like for customers, and it's like some of those defaults that you're expecting people to possibly change, and you want to be able to revert without having to worry about that case, could use that. Just don't double export. We had a person that would do that. They would click in, I don't know if it does any harm, but it would be in default config and strong arm. It was double exported because they thought they had to click both. So you don't have to, it's one or the other, which I think would be cool if like default config, if you clicked it there, would know to like hide it from strong arm. Well, I guess that's not useful. That's one thing that I've experienced is we've set it so that custom page manager handlers can be exported, which is super nice because then you can have a custom page, but then all the handlers are in different modules. Well, if you export the page via features, it wants to try to featureize all those handlers that are put into code for a reason. So it's kind of hard to like say, hey, get your hands off that. Like we exported it over here for a reason, so it's not in this main feature. And it's very hard to tell features to like slap its hand and say, stop grabbing this, unless there's a secret somewhere I don't know about.
In the .info profile, like you do a features exclude.
For that hand.
You don't want it to take.
That is actually, yeah. I'm kind of mad at myself right now for forgetting that, so I'm gonna write it down. Because that's how we have our theming system, is each theme has its own page variant for the main custom page. But to keep, we were having like features madness with overrides because of new themes. So we have the custom page defined in the main module, but then each theme defines its own handler. But then if we update the main module, it tries to grab every handler that's in the ecosystem. So I was hoping there'd be a way for the individual modules to tell features, hey, bugger off. But I guess adding in it and adding that info file is much easier than having to tell everybody, hey, watch your code hunks and discard all this. I guess what would people be interested in for next month? I know the past few ones we did like the discussion, and then went for the presentation one to try to get some of the beginner stuff, like how you could really start ramping forward and playing around, like creating your own little things to like help boost your productivity. Because a lot of the ones have been like, how can you start fast tracking and becoming a site builder and like starting sites and ramping up that. So I guess what should we do for the next one? Should we go for another presentation? I can try to get somebody to do the remote, like to do it over Hangouts. I hope the internet wasn't too horrible for the screencast. I mean, should I try to get somebody to present? Is there anything that people think would be like super awesome or like to gear towards?
Speaking as a beginner, it's kind of hard.
Well, no, I mean, no, because as you play around, there should be things that like kind of poke at you, like, oh, it'd be great to know this. It's just trying to find someone to speak would be easier if like there was like a generalized topic. Otherwise, I'll try to just ask somebody to go over it.
How big is notifications?
Notifications,
Different things to send emails out to them,
broad. It depends on the use case. I'd say, I think I don't know of a single solution.
for new content and stuff like that.
There's a number of solutions. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
A presentation could be made around such a topic.
Also, one of the things I was looking at was the SMTP emulator. A lot of people I know talking about they bring down the production version and then all of a sudden it shoots out all these emails. But if you have their SMTP emulators that will just send emails into a record in the machine.
So one thing you
Solutions for that.
Yeah.
You don't need to know, like the development module has a thing that'll like grab all your emails and files. So
there's a way. I was hoping this would be the
Use a virtual box.
yeah.
Test server.
So one thing you can do is just Google this managing mail handling for development or testing. And you can actually, if you enable the Devil module, it's in here somewhere, but you just add something to your settings.php to override the mail class, and then it, David said, dumps it into a file.
do it in UI. I think there's a place in UI you can say like develop emails.
You can do that, but I just fear if you do it in settings.php and then you have an environment variable, you can,
Oh, because that doesn't get overridden when you pull up the database from production.
yeah.
So you can set it to
Mhm.
So you could disable mail based on a server variable.
So you could have like hot swap if you set up your local environment to have like my awesome development environment, Epic, variable name because Epic is awesome. If that was true, you could have like if that is true, $conf mail system equals devil mail. Then if you upload it to production, it's not going to trigger because that's not available. But as soon as you pull it down, and like if you call in the database, you don't have to worry about that. And I just sent like 300 emails. They're not going to invite me to the pool party.
That's some kids out there. So they can, he might have been a little bit slower.
I think so. People can just hear us. It says zero was showed that Lowell joined.
I did send a message to the guy that said he wanted to get down there, because if you updated your message, if you update the message, I'm not sure if the email gets sent out.
I should.
If he wasn't looking, because when I brought it up, I couldn't see the links. I actually had to click on it to bring up the message to see the links.
So I apologize.
I sent him a message saying that you updated it with links.
See, school is just like, I was so excited to take a math class because I was sick of reading books. Math made it worse. So I'm ramping myself back up to Swedish. It's just a lot. School's stupid.
So Jackson, grab a math class instead of a math class.
So that's why I have no idea what to do for the next session, because I just can't think anymore of new ideas, of new.
You gotta stop broadcasting that. You don't want to do